Welcome to another video for Mastering the California Awards program. Today we'll be talking about the 2015-2016 Summary of Changes. Before we dive in, I want to make something clear. You should only be watching this video if you're in a chapter who competed last year and you want to know how the cap has changed for this year. If you're a new chapter, this video is not for you. If you're a returning chapter, but you've never participated in competitive events in FBLA, this video is also not for you. The reason for this is that I will only be talking about changes, and if you're unfamiliar with the program, this won't be valuable at all. If this is the case, you can go ahead and skip the Summary of Changes section in the CAP and just review the guidelines as it stands today. Alright, so now that we've cleared that up, let's flip over to the CAP. So I have the CAP opened here in PDF format. Let's head down to the table of contents and click on the Summary of Changes to jump to that section. Scroll up here so you can see it better. Alright, starting from the top, eligibility. So good news for this year, the top 4 competitors from any event at state, except for Creed, of course, because that's not a national event, can now compete at nationals. So last year it was only objective events, but now you'll have more of a chance to qualify. The next big thing, of course, is new events. This year we have one new event called Sales Presentation. This is an individual event that begins at the section level. So you should read the guidelines for this event carefully though, because what you have to do at section versus state is very different. And this is very different from all the other events that we have offered, where a section and state, what you have to do is very similar, in most cases the same. But for sales presentation, please pay very close attention because what you have to do is very different. At section, you'll need to submit a 7-minute video of yourself selling something. So if you go to the event guidelines page for sales presentation, you'll see the topic of what you have to sell. But this is all you have to do at section. Record yourself selling with a video camera. So this should simulate you presenting in front of a panel of judges. So don't zoom, don't pan, or use any other effects in your video. You'll just need to submit this video for judging and then you're done. Just go to the section conference to see if you placed. Now, if you were in the top 2 at section, you'll qualify to compete at state, and at the state level, it'll be very different. You will sell an item of your choice live in front of a panel of judges at the conference. So there's no need to submit anything advanced, you don't need to do another video. So again, please read all the event guidelines for this event thoroughly if you plan on competing in this one. So let's move on to modified events. Accounting 2. So Accounting 2 is no longer a production event. It'll just be like Accounting 1, just an objective test. So the only difference now is that you may have taken more than 2 semesters of accounting classes since you won't need to submit a transcript. Business ethics. The only thing that's changed for this year for business ethics is that we will no longer provide judges with a copy of your written synopsis when you present at the conference. And that's the written synopsis that you submit for prejudging. So just make sure you don't count on them knowing anything about what you'll be presenting before you start. So the rating sheet was also modified to reflect this. Other than that, the event is unchanged. Business presentation. So business presentation is now called Introduction to Business Presentation, since it's now restricted to only students from the 7th to 10th grade. So also, another change is that instead of a written synopsis about your presentation that you normally submit for prejudging, you'll be submitting the presentation itself. So make sure the judges can see your presenter notes. Rating sheets are also modified to reflect this. Similarly, for business procedures, it's now called Introduction to Business Procedures, and now it's also restricted for students from 7th to 10th grade only. And that's the only change for this one. It's still an objective event. Business math, to make things consistent, since it was already a 7th to 10th grade only event, is now called Introduction to Financial Math. Desktop publishing. So this event is now known as Publication Design. So there's lots of name changes this year for the CAP. This event works just like any other project event now. The objective test was removed, and now there's a presentation component at the conference. So there's just a prejudge component that you submit, and then a presentation at the conference. So make sure to check out the new rating sheets for that as well. Another name change, digital design is now called graphic design. Always, again, look at the latest rating sheet for these modified events. Now we have Future Business Leader. For this event, you'll now be submitting your cover letter and resume online. No need to mail anything. At the conference, you should bring 3 copies with you to put in one folder, and you'll be handing these to the judges personally during your interview. Make sure to look at these new rating sheets as well. And the last modified event is job interview. So you still have your application as well as your cover letter and resume. And just like FBL, you'll be submitting these online and bringing 3 copies in one folder to hand to the judges during your interview. Again, the rating sheets were revised, so make sure to look at those. Lastly, we'll go over what's some of the general guideline changes. So let's take a look at eligibility deadlines. So this year, in order to compete in the California Awards program, you must be a paid member by January 22nd to compete at section and March 1st to compete at state. As always, make sure to bring your photo ID and name tag. Number of events. You can compete in 2 active, which are individual or team events, and only 1 chapter event. So very similar to what we've done in the past, but we just wanted to clarify what an active event means. Creed does not count as an active event. So that means you can do Creed, 2 other events, and 1 chapter event. Make sure you only do 1 chapter event, so you can't present for 2 chapter events. Photo ID guidelines. Please read this to see what is acceptable. We get questions about photocopies every year. The answer is still no. Make sure to bring a real ID. If your school does not issue you one, and we want to clarify this year, and you do not have a driver's license or a California ID or a passport, you must get your school to print you a transcript with your photo on it and emboss it with the school seal. There are no exceptions. We have to know that it's you. So now that you know this and it's early in the year, please go get all that taken care of well in advance so you won't run into any issues at the conference when you're competing. Let's move on to production event submission. For this, you will still be receiving hard copy tests in the mail. I will still be mailing those out to the proctors, but you will no longer be mailing them back. Instead, you will be uploading it for submission and for grading. So clear instructions will be provided to the proctor, so there's no need to worry about that now. Just be aware that it will be online submission this year. Let's talk about some team event guidelines. We just want to clarify this year that you cannot add anyone to your team when you move from section to state. So what we mean by this is that if you have a 2-person team who qualified to compete at section and to move on to state, you can't decide to add a buddy to be a part of your team to compete at state. So if you qualified as a team as 2, you have to compete as a team of 2. You can't add another person just to add another person. What you can do though is still substitute someone else if one of you can't make it at state. Substitutions are only allowed if they are registered though, so you only have until the state registration deadline to send a new person to substitute for the person who can't make it. We cannot have any alternates when you get to the conference. Now, performance event guidelines. So there's been some confusion about this, so we want to make this clear. There's been some questions about this last year. Handshakes with the judges are optional. It does not affect your scoring. It's not on the rating sheet, so they can't add or subtract points either way regarding handshakes. Another thing to keep in mind is that for events with equipment setup, like your projector, you have 5 minutes to set this up. If you go over the 5 minutes, the time you take over the 5 minutes will cut into your presentation time. For example, if you have a 7-minute presentation and you take not 5, but the extra minute to set it up, if you take 6 minutes, then you will only have 6 minutes to do your presentation, because that extra minute was subtracted from the 7-minute presentation that you originally had. So make sure you practice setting up and making sure everything works beforehand. And finally, prejudged event submission. We're doing things online as much as possible now, so all prejudged events and the statement of assurance will be submitted online. So stay tuned for more information on how events will be submitted. And that's it for this year's cap changes. If you have any questions, make sure to contact me, Lona Kwan, at competition@cafbla.org. Thanks for watching!